Hi there, I'm Noodle CDS and this is my setup. This is an Asus P7P55D LGA1156 motherboard with an Intel i5 750 running at stock speeds. My GPU is a Sapphire HD 6950 Dirt 3 edition with 2 gigs of DDR5 VRAM. And though cheap, I am running two 4 gig sticks with a total of 8 gigs of Corsair ValueSelect 1333 MHz memory. I use this to play Counter-Strike and watch YouTube videos. Which is cool if this was 2011. 2021 now. I don't even play Counter-Strike anymore.
With that silly bit out of the way, I'd now like to show you how hardware from the last decade performs today. First, let's break down what we're dealing with today. The CPU is an Intel i5 750 released Q3 of 2009. It comes from the 45nm Linfield liner processors with a base frequency of 2.66 GHz and is overclockable or boostable to 3.20 GHz and has 4 cores and 4 threads. That's right, this CPU is overclockable. And speaking of overclockable, the Asus P7P55D motherboard supports overclocking for both the CPU and RAM in the form of the Asus AI Tweaker. It is an LGA 1156 socket that supports up to 1600, 1333, and 1066 MHz of memory. For RAM, we have two sticks of 4GB 1333 MHz Corsair ValueSelect RAM, the maximum frequency the CPU can support. Finally, the GPU is a Sapphire HD 6950 Dirt 3 edition, released in 2011. It's from the Northern Ireland line of GPUs from AMD Radeon, with a clock speed of 800 MHz. By the way, this is different from the normal edition because it doesn't have a blower fan, but instead it's fitted with a dual fan that runs around 1800 RPM on idle. For the other parts, I have a Cougar GX750 Gold non-modular because it was a silly mistake. Fans are a Dark Flash DR12 1200 RPM Halo fans. Storage is a Crucial BX500 3D NAND SSD, and the case is a Deepcool Matrix 55 White. Modern ads, but we're here for the legacy tech. For testing, this was ran at room temperature with the glass side panel on, no overclocking, and fans were ran at stock speeds. Footage was captured on my phone to mitigate any FPS loss, so sorry in advance for the quality. And I grabbed the average and minimum FPS as well as the average temps from the CPU and GPU, and I'll be showing these to you today. First things first, on idle the CPU bounces between 51 and 59 degrees Celsius, while the GPU stays around 45 degrees. Kicking things off with a quick productivity review with Blender, rendering with cycles and utilizing the CPU only, this scene with a lot of refractive and reflecting surfaces took around 20 minutes to finish. The CPU stays at around 75 degrees Celsius but can peak at 79. This puts it above TJ max, but there doesn't seem to be any throttling. So a very simple render on cycles with the CPU will take an awful amount of time. I won't run things like Cinebench nor replicate very complicated tests because I don't want to stress the CPU too much and I don't have money for upgrades or an extra CPU. By the way, if you're wondering why I didn't test the GPU with this, it's because despite this card being OpenCL compatible, it doesn't show up on Blender. Now for gaming. Starting off with an old title, Rainbow Six Vegas 2 was released back in 2008 and runs on the Unreal Engine 3 platform. All settings were set to high and motion blur turned off. This is the beginning sequence of the game where the actual action kicks off. The CPU is more utilized in this game at 91% usage max. It runs at 105 FPS average and can sometimes dip into the 70s. Indoors, the FPS can go higher than 120, but I'm only referencing the outside battles for the average. Next up is Risk of Rain 2, released 2020 with graphics set to low and 8th texture resolution. Roar 2 hammers the GPU hard, staying at around 97% usage for a majority of the playthrough. The game is very much playable with an average FPS of 81 and going as low as 63. The only time that both the GPU gets utilized less and we get lower FPS is during the ending sequence. The CPU is more utilized in this section, but maintains its value around the 70 range and going as high as 82%. During the beginning of the end sequence, the GPU will hover around 50 before ramping up to the 90 range before going back down. Strange, but I don't really have anything to compare it with. Next up, CSGO, released 2012, is a well-known CPU-dependent game. Settings are set to high and took place in a multiplayer DM match on Dust 2, because why play any other map? Average FPS is around 78 and drops to as low as 56. The game stutters and skips frames sometimes, which makes it slightly unplayable. The CPU is pegged at 100% usage while sometimes spiking down to the low 80s. For temps, the CPU is 1 degree over TJ max, while the GPU is at 62. Next up, we have Minecraft, released 2011. Settings used were fancy with a render distance of 12. When the game initially loads the world or is loading areas or chunks, the CPU will be fully utilized, making the game very stuttery for a little while. With an average FPS of 45, this game is very much playable despite being below 60 FPS. In instances where you would look somewhere that doesn't have too many things to render, like looking straight up or down, the ocean, or inside a cave, or the flat world preset, the FPS can easily rise from the 50 range, with the highest I've seen being 145 FPS in the flat world preset. The CPU only maxes out at 60 degrees Celsius while the GPU remains at 50. Finally, we have Valheim, released 2021, all low 1080p. You may find it weird to see this game here, but I think there was a time when the official requirements were a GTX 500 series card or a Radeon 6900 card. Therefore, here it is. Our GPU is being utilized mostly at peak 98%. In a busy environment, the average FPS is 31 with a minimum of 17. In other areas like caves or the ocean, the average FPS increases to 36 and jumps within the 30 range. The game does not stutter unless we hit the sub 20 FPS range, where it becomes very unbearable and very unplayable. So yes, this game is playable in a sense, but if you have particle and asset heavy areas, it becomes a slideshow, but at least the FPS isn't in the single digits. Now I do have numbers for one true final game, that being Apex Legends. But this was ran last year on my Radeon 6850 that has since died. Well, actually it didn't die, I'll tell you more about this later. Thankfully, I have some footage left over from my first attempt at making this video, so I can show you those instead. I also still have the listed FPS on average, which is a whopping 22 FPS and a minimum of 10. This was truly an unplayable setup. You can tell from my performance as seen by my KDR from Season 7. I played Season 7 exclusively on this setup, especially the matchmaking for rank, just to test it out. And evidently, it wasn't very good. In the end, it was like playing a slideshow and it was very nauseating sometimes. So Apex Legends, extremely stuttery, extremely low FPS, and very much unplayable. And with that, it's time to wrap things up. I'll also touch on some things I didn't go over because I've been in and out on revising the script. First, it's not possible to upgrade to Windows 10 for some reason. When I was getting this setup, I did have a Windows 10 installer, but it failed to install after multiple attempts. Next, there is a weird electronic zapping sound coming from the motherboard. I don't know why this is a thing or where it's coming from exactly, but it's there. Next, recording audio with this setup doesn't sound right. Checking on the audio in software reveals static and distortion on the right side of recording only. On the left, it's pretty much what you've been hearing through for at least half of this recording. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. This is not a problem with my microphone, as testing this on a different computer does not reproduce the static. Finally, USB 3.0 is not supported on this motherboard, as well as other modern things like dual BIOS, RGB headers, BIOS updates and flashbacks, and maintenance codes like beep codes and readouts. Well, in terms of maintenance, there are green lights that light up in respective areas that correspond to a part on the motherboard, but it isn't very user-friendly. Well, now it's time to talk about the GPU, and hopefully somebody listening has an idea of the situation. Remember when I said I couldn't properly test Apex because my 6850 died? Actually, that's because it kept on overheating and would then crash the graphics driver and the display. This would still occur even after pasting, and believe me, I would do it again if only I didn't run out of paste. So, what about the 6950? It also overheats and crashes the graphics driver, but the display would return after a second or so. I don't know if Nvidia's Fermi cards also had the same problem, because they do overheat as well, so maybe it's just a sign of the times. So, what did we learn today? For starters, it's pretty clear that this setup has been really behind when it comes to gaming and productivity. The i5-750 is easily bottlenecked and cannot stand with current CPUs, due in part to being 4-core 4-thread and running with an old architecture. The 6950 HD actually performs decently despite it being 10 years since its initial release. However, since it doesn't support Vulkan or at least a higher version of OpenCL since it runs on 1.2, it's not gonna last much longer either. For RAM, well, not only is just 8 gigs considered slow, but DDR3 and 1666MHz memory has been really bad for multitasking. If you look at all the Chrome tabs, Discord, editing apps, and game launchers one person might even have open. So in conclusion, hardware from the last decade isn't viable in any way anymore. You might get something out of it if you maybe get a bit more RAM, but there isn't very much it can do despite that. And that's all to the video. Thank you very much for sticking around. This video is around a year overdue, and I will try to get better on uploading things. This is the first time I've actually reviewed the setup, so I'm very open to suggestions. I would like if you could help me refine my process by going down in the comments below and pointing out what I need to improve on and what I should just toss away in the cutting room floor. With your help, hopefully the next time I do one of these, I actually might know what I'm doing. Anyway, that's really all. Thank you very much for watching.